Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes. To keep in touch with us, use our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, which are all at Q and Review. That's CUEANDREVIEW. Or get in touch via information@qandreview.com. That's information@CUEANDREVIEW.com. Please like and share our podcasts and give us any constructive feedback.
This article is from The National, date 2nd May 2022, from the Culture section. 4 Scottish routes among best UK road trips for summer 2022, by Jamie Jones. A new study has revealed the best UK road trips for summer 2022, with 4 Scottish routes making the list. Hoping to inspire Brits to take the road and explore the best the UK has to offer, experts at Moneybarn carried out research to reveal the most recommended road trips. They took into account factors including driving routes and reviews on TripAdvisor, accident data, social media statistics, sunlight hours and tourist attractions, giving an overall road trip score. The Jurassic Coast hit the top spot, making it the best road trip in the UK. The Southern Coast shoreline scored highly for its picturesque views, being a hit on TikTok and Instagram, as well as one of the sunniest spots. The North Coast 500 followed closely behind with a 7.6 road trip score. The Scottish route also scored highly for its picturesque views and demand and interest, as well as offering the most tourist attractions overall, with 286. 2 of the top 5 road trips are Scottish, along with the North Coast 500. Glen Lyon, 6.6, ranked 3rd. In addition to this, the Coig in Ayrshire and the Clyde Islands came in at number 8, and the Rhode Isles in the Scottish Highlands appeared 9th. That article was by Jamie Jones. This article is from The National, date 2nd May 2022, from the Politics section. Can 16-year-olds vote in Scottish local council elections? By Anita Badani. With the 2022 Scottish local elections rapidly approaching on May 5th, many may be wondering if 16 and 17-year-olds are eligible to vote in these elections. In the UK, the standard voting age is 18. This is the age you're able to vote in the UK parliamentary election. In England and Northern Ireland, this applies to all elections within their jurisdiction. However, in Scotland and Wales, the voting age is 16 for local and devolved government, Scottish Parliament and Welsh Assembly elections. This means that 16 and 17-year-olds are eligible to cast their vote in the upcoming local council elections in Scotland. Why is the voting age 16 in Scotland? The 2014 Scottish independence referendum was the first time the voting age was lowered to 16 in Scotland. After the trial proved to be successful, with many young people turning out to participate, a bill was passed in 2015 at the Scottish Parliament enshrining the right to vote for 16 and 17-year-olds in Scottish parliamentary and local elections. This came into effect in 2016 in Scotland. What is the age to stand in elections? Currently, the age to stand for elections is 18. However, the SNP plan to extend young people's participation in democracy by allowing 16 and 17-year-olds the right to stand for election in Scotland. The plan is expected to receive cross-party support. If agreed, It would mean the upcoming council elections will be the last time 16 and 17-year-olds are barred from standing, and they would be able to win a seat in Holyrood in 2026. SNP MSP Emma Roddick, who at the age of 24 is Holyrood's youngest parliamentarian, said, "Young people have so much to contribute to our politics, and they have the biggest stake in ensuring we make the right decisions for their future. We are all served better by more diverse, representative parliament and councils, so bringing the age of elected members to the same as voters is completely logical." That article was by Anita Badani. This article is from The National, date 2nd May 2022, from the News section. Glasgow waspy woman remortgages home to cope with the UK cost of living crisis. By Craig Meehan. Rosemary Dixon imagined a comfortable retirement, spent with friends in cafes, with the help of a state pension she worked hard to pay into her entire working life. Instead, she's had to remortgage her home and cut back every way she can just to keep afloat. A former NHS worker, 64, is one of millions of women in the UK hit with a double whammy of the cost of living crisis and a delayed state pension. The Women Against State Pension Inequality, WASPI organisation, has criticised the way men and women's pensions have been equalised. Women born between 1950 and 1955 were told in 1995 that their pension age would be raised from 60 to 65. Dixon, a former NHS technician who lives in Glasgow, told The National, "There's no more fat left to trim as costs continue to rise. I find it's getting harder and harder to make ends meet. I can't work now that I have a bad back and various other health issues. I'm finding myself in this no man's land while I'm waiting for my state pension to come in, and I'm surviving on my occupational pension." Dixon said she's one of the lucky ones, as many elderly single women do not have an occupational pension, but that may prove not to be enough as inflation soars to the highest level in 30 years, putting those already struggling closer to the breadline. She continued, "I've seen things go up so much that I've had to remortgage the house and go for a lifetime mortgage to tide me over until I get the state pension because things were just becoming unaffordable. It was an extremely tough decision and actually made me really depressed because I had worked all my life to pay for my flat. I very rarely go out. I don't use my car anymore. I'm dependent on my bus pass. I've even had to give up bowling." Despite the efforts to save money, Dixon said there are some things she can't cut back on, like bread or milk. "I don't know how young families are coping because it's bad enough for me just on my own. I see women who are my age struggling, who are too proud to admit that they're doing without." Eating or heating isn't just a catchphrase, it's a reality for millions of people, and it's the loss of dignity. We paid, we didn't evade. We have been paying our national insurance since 15 years of age. Carla O'Hara from the WASPI campaign said, "There are nearly 350,000 women in Scotland in similar circumstances to Rosemary's. For many women, this lack of notice was catastrophic. Some had to sell their homes. Others continued working in jobs they were no longer fit for or had to break their promises to look after grandchildren or elderly relatives. They are facing an uphill struggle in the current economic climate." She added, "Many thousands of 1950s women have already died before reaching their new pension age. We need a fair and fast solution before more women die. We really can't wait much longer." That article was by Craig Meehan.
From The National, Monday the 2nd of May 2022, from the comment section, Elon Musk buying Twitter, disrupting often a red flag for ideas which erode workers' rights, by Stephen Payton. When people think of Silicon Valley and the tech giants that have turned San Francisco into their personal playground, I imagine many picture the golden sunshine and sprawling trendy campuses of Google, Apple and Facebook, images of sleek robots rolling from administrative building to creative hub, coffee shops where world-changing conversations take place as the general public side-eye hip execs in the hope that they might catch the next piece of tech in their pocket or on their face. Yet, when I think of the particular brand of technological innovation that labels itself as a market disruptor, I don't think of those bright streets and glass rotundas, but rather a small dark stage in the late summer of 2021. In a room crowded with journalists and tech reporters who had just spent an hour and a half listening to detailed plans of how the technology behind Tesla cars was evolving, CEO Elon Musk brought to the stage the future of robotics, which in this case turned out to be a man in white and black spandex suit, awkwardly dancing out of time to a room of bemused spectators. Not a prototype of the announced Tesla bot, not even something close to a working model, just a man in a tight-fitting suit walking like a robot onto a stage before spasming into a dance routine. Musk went on to claim that robots just like this one, except for in every way which will be nothing like a living human in a onesie, will likely have a prototype sometime in 2022. Okay. This is maybe one of the most accurate representations of what has come to be known as disruptive tech, and this trend should serve as a warning to us all, particularly as Twitter prepares to hand the keys of the kingdom to the poster boy of unrealistic expectations himself. Musk is emblematic of a Silicon Valley culture of identifying a square-shaped problem, then jamming a circle-sized solution into it in the name of disrupting the market, and he is in no way stands alone in this front. One of the most famous recent examples is that of Elizabeth Holmes, the millionaire founder of a tech startup, Theranos, who lied about the technology behind a proprietary blood testing invention and is currently awaiting sentencing after scamming more than $1 billion worth of investment from financial backers. Or, if we want to look closer to home, there's the example of GB News. Despite assurances from the founder of one of Britain's newest news outlets, and I use the word news here very lightly, the channel has increasingly swung to more and more extreme right-wing partisanship as it has stumbled from failure to failure. A fascinating piece from Stuart McGurk in the New Statesman this week has dived deep into the troubled first year of Britain's answer to Fox News, a title that its founders allegedly take issue with, but if the shoe fits. Standing in a Hilton hotel a year before its disastrous launch, GB News founder Angelos Fragnopoulos outlined to those who had signed up his vision that GB News was not a broadcaster, it was a tech company. Importantly, it was here to disrupt the world of TV news. And by disrupt, what Fragnopoulos appeared to mean was to do away with many traditional broadcast roles in favour of piling the work high on fewer staff under the guise of revolution, and we all saw how that went. This phrase, to disrupt, has increasingly become a red flag in the tech industry for half-baked ideas and products that rely more on the cult of personality surrounding their founders than any proven ability to work. It has come to paint a picture of a group of supposed changemakers who are more interested in the perception of innovation over the act itself, and with that becomes a litany of workers' rights violations. There was a point that technological innovation meant building towards a world where there was more time for leisure. Instead, we have the same exploitative work practices of the past repackaged as aspirational hustle culture, an intrinsic marker of so-called disruptive tech startups. GB News piled the work onto too few staff to run efficiently. Theranos had its failures behind a Stasi-like prison of security and lies that has been attributed to the suicide of its chief scientist, Ian Gibbons. And Elon Musk fired Tesla workers who took unpaid leave after catching COVID-19, following the reopening of factories against the evidence of California health officials. Across the board, organisations that have successfully disrupted billion-pound industries, such as Amazon and Uber, seem inextricably tied with virulent anti-union practices and the burgeoning gig economy. The future, it seems, is built on the back of worker exploitation, something worth thinking about on this May Day. Instead of real technological advancement, we have polished reworkings of existing, inefficient tech that seem to rely more on the star power of their proponents than common sense. I doubt very much that Elon Musk planned for the future of transport. Not a reworked public network, but rather a series of underground tunnels for cars that can only carry a few people at a time. Would have even been considered a legitimate proposal if it didn't have its name and wealth behind it. As figures like Elon Musk, alongside Mark Zuckerberg, edge closer to having bigger stakes in how we even communicate, we would all do well to consider not only the human cost of these enterprises, but of the nature of the world that tech giants are building. While they may have the money to avoid the worst consequences of their decisions, it is a future that the rest of us will have no choice but to live under. And that was an opinion piece by Stephen Payton. From the National, Monday the 2nd of May 2022, from the comments section. Neil Parish shows zero tolerance is the only way to stop rampant misogyny. By Kirsty Strickland. If you thought ambushed by a cake was a lame excuse, just wait till you hear what Neil Parish MP came up with to explain why he watched pornography at work. His browsing history started off innocently enough, but somehow, he says, he was transported from a website about tractors to an explicit adult site with a similar name. If you believe that, I've got a bridge from Scotland to Northern Ireland to sell you. After days of speculation and outrage, Neil Parish eventually announced that he would be resigning as a Member of Parliament. At this point, it doesn't actually matter how credible his "tractors were my gateway drug" excuse is. The fact is, he watched porn at work, in full view of others, on at least 2 occasions that we know of. Some have pointed out he must be incredibly stupid not to realise that others might see what he was doing. Men who watch porn in public places are involving other people in their fantasy without their consent. So I'd be surprised if the discomfort of his female colleagues who witnessed his behaviour wasn't part of the thrill for him. This episode has been revealing in a number of ways. The usual approach of the current Tory government to accusations of wrongdoing is threefold: deny, deflect, delay. When the facts are shown and they can no longer deny, they swiftly move on to telling the public that the wrongdoing they're angry about isn't as important as whatever the big issue of the day is. When that doesn't work, we see toothless inquiries, investigations and internal reviews announced that kick the wrongdoing into the long grass. Neil Parish resigned before that spin machine whirred into life. The fact that the Conservative Party initially refused to name and suspend the whip from Neil Parish speaks volumes about where their priorities lie. Spoiler alert, they don't lie with the female Tory MPs who have voiced concerns about sexism and sexual harassment within the Parliament and party. Some of them have suggested the problem has got worse under the leadership of Boris Johnson, citing the culture of rule-breaking that has flourished on his watch. 3 serving cabinet ministers are currently facing allegations of sexual misconduct after being reported to the parliamentary watchdog. At PMQs last week, Boris Johnson said, in an answer from Caroline Lucas, that sexual harassment was a sackable offence. We'll wait and see whether that pledge is one of the rare few that he intends to fulfil. I won't hold my breath. Whenever the institutional sexism and misogyny of Westminster is in the spotlight, we hear theories about what has gone wrong and what needs to change. At the weekend, the Conservative Party chairman said that after the next election, at least half of their MPs must be women. This is one measure that they believe might help tackle the boys' club vibe of the party. Resident Egypt Michael Fabricant was quick to dismiss the idea. He said he doesn't support quotas to ensure gender balance because candidates should be elected on merit alone. Otherwise, he says, you might end up with women in Parliament who aren't up to the job. It's a bold statement to make considering the main defence of the law-breaking Prime Minister is that he was too stupid to understand the rules he wrote. Gender balance across the Parliament might indeed help to dilute the stench of macho entitlement. And other suggestions, such as making it easier for women to make complaints and tackling the drinking culture on the estate, might make a bit of difference too. But the only thing that will actually stamp out the rampant misogyny and harassment at Westminster is whips, from all parties, taking a zero-tolerance approach with offenders. If female MPs and staffers are warning each other about which MPs to avoid, then the system isn't working. If, as has been reported this week, a certain minister has to be given a minder at boozy events to make sure he behaves himself, then it's clear that they are tackling the problem the wrong way around. Westminster does have a culture problem. The politics of self-preservation have meant that for too long, parties would rather excuse the bad behaviour of their representatives than tackle it. There are signs that the mood is shifting. To be clear, I don't for 1 second believe that Boris Johnson is so horrified by Neil Parish watching porn in the chamber that he has now devoted himself to the feminist cause. He will only ever take action that aligns with his own self-interest. But his female colleagues are angry at party inaction on this issue, and they have made it clear they aren't going to put up with it any longer. And at this perilous stage of his premiership, Boris Johnson really can't afford to make any new enemies. And that was a comment piece by Kirsty Strickland.
The National Politics on Wednesday the 4th of May. Scottish writer Billy Kay speaks out over Scots language abuse after Holyrood speech. An article written by Craig Meehan, multimedia journalist. Scottish author Billy Kay has spoken out over the abuse he's received for speaking in Scots, saying the hatred has been hard for my children. The writer and broadcaster received support for his historic Scots speech in Holyrood, becoming the first person to present the Time for Reflection address to MSPs in the language. But his appearance led to a barrage of abuse from those who took issue with Scots being deemed a language. Some users accused Mr. Kay of speaking a made-up language, branding him an embarrassment, while others claimed Scots was gibberish, and one senior Labour member commented, "Literally nobody in Scotland speaks like this. What a clown." Tweeting about the abuse, the Scots language campaigner said, "1 week ago, I gave this Time for Reflection, a moment of immense pride for me and my family. The reaction was positive from people who actually watched it, and extremely negative from North Britons who act like snarling dugs when exposed to Scots." The abuse was at low life level, like the lad who replied to my tweet in Scots, in English, Yataja. When you put your head above the parapet and promote confident national and international Scottishness, you get used to such vitriol. The hatred, though, was hard for my children. Mr. Kay vowed to continue speaking in and campaigning for Scots, saying his speech proved the language can be used in a formal setting. He continued, "They, like me, are confident multilingual Europeans who cannot conceive of people wanting to suppress and negate a language of such expressive power and with such a rich and brilliant literary history. So we'll continue to sing it loud, we're Scots and we're proud. I showed that Scots can be used effectively in a formal setting. Please join me in doing the same on any occasion you can. Like every other minority language, use it or we'll lose it. Thank you for the support and the love." It comes after Mr. Kay was caught in a back and forth with Labour life peer George Fuchs, who replied to the Sunday National's interview with a Scottish writer, claiming there is no Scots language. Mr. Fuchs' post prompted outrage, with several writers and academics saying his claim that Scots was a dialect and not a language was false. The Labour politician said there is no Scots language, having been brought up in Keith, speaking English in the Doric dialect, and then Edinburgh and Ayrshire with 2 different dialects of English. I can confirm they have similarities, but also major differences, but all with the same English grammar. Mr. Kay himself responded to the post, saying it was while Mr. Fuchs was part of the Tony Blair administration that the UK government officially recognised Scots as a language. He said, "George, comment on stuff you know something about. The UK government signed up for the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages, giving official recognition for Scots back in 2000. It was ratified by the Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair in 2001. An article written by Craig Meehan. The National News on Wednesday the 4th of May. Boris Johnson mixes up Teesside and Tyneside in embarrassing blunder. An article written by Steph Braun, multimedia political journalist. Boris Johnson has made yet another embarrassing geographical error after he mixed up Teesside with Tyneside. After campaigning in Whitley Bay in the northeast of England, the Prime Minister tweeted he'd been speaking to voters in Teesside, when the seaside town is actually in Tyneside, some 40 miles further north. It's not the first time Mr Johnson has said he was somewhere he wasn't, after he once claimed COP26 had taken place in Edinburgh rather than Glasgow during a Downing Street press conference. And back in 2018, when he was Foreign Secretary, he had to be spoken to by then Prime Minister Theresa May after he repeatedly mixed up Yemen with Lebanon during a cabinet discussion on the Yemen civil war. At the meeting he said, "We have to do something about the Saudi war on Lebanon." Ministers thought it was a momentary slip initially, but to their shock he then repeated the mistake, despite Lebanon being 1,400 miles away from Yemen and not involved in that conflict. His latest mishap has not been well received by opposition MPs in the Teesside and Tyneside regions. Bridget Phillipson, Labour MP for Houghton and Sunderland South, said on Twitter, "Teesside, Tyneside, it's all the same to him. He doesn't even know where he is. Britain deserves better." Tynemouth MP Alan Campbell added, "The Prime Minister believes he was campaigning in Teesside. Actually, he was in Whitley Bay, North Tyneside. He doesn't really care where he is or what he says. He doesn't really care about who he meets or what they care about." Labour Deputy Leader Angela Rayner also pointed out the Prime Minister's blunder and tweeted, how to say this, "That's not Teesside." The Labour North group mocked the Prime Minister as well with a joke, "Where's the Wally map?" detailing how far Whitley Bay was from Teesside and telling him to bring a map next time. Mr Johnson has since deleted the post and put out another tweet, but this time he decided to not bother trying to be specific about where he was. It says, "It was a fantastic day to be out campaigning in the northeast." An article written by Steph Braun. The National News on Wednesday the 4th of May. BP profits skyrocket amid demands for windfall tax. An article written by Ninian Wilson. BP has notched up its highest quarterly underlying profits for more than a decade, thanks to soaring oil and gas prices as calls grow for a windfall tax on the sector. The energy giant explained that the profits were in part a result of exceptional oil and gas trading. The announcement comes as the UK records its highest rate of inflation for 30 years and faces a cost of living crisis partly driven by ballooning energy prices. BP saw underlying replacement cost profits, its preferred measure, more than double to $6.2 billion, or £5 billion, for the first 3 months of this year, up from $2.6 billion, or £2.1 billion, a year ago. The result was far better than the $4.5 billion, or £3.6 billion, expected by analysts and is likely to further fuel demands for a windfall tax on oil and gas firms to help ease the cost of living crisis. Responding to the news, the Scottish Greens renewed their calls for the move. The party's energy spokesperson Mark Ruskell, MSP, said, "Far too many families are struggling and facing costs they simply cannot afford. Nobody should have to choose between heating and eating, but for some they can now afford neither." For the fossil fuel giants, times have rarely been better. Introducing a windfall tax on the obscene profits made by the big energy companies would be a vital step in raising the money that is needed to help households pay for their fuel bills. It would allow us to supercharge energy efficiency programs, invest in renewables at a faster rate, and help homeowners to decarbonise their homes to make them warmer and more energy efficient. We need immediate action from the Treasury before costs go up again. There's no time to waste if we're to take the climate action that is needed to reduce household bills and accelerate our pathway towards a just transition away from fossil fuels. Chancellor Rishi Sunak has so far distanced himself from attacks on firms like BP, instead looking to companies making big profits to invest the cash back into the UK. In response, BP unveiled plans alongside its quarterly figures to invest up to £18 billion into the UK energy system by 2030. it pledged to invest in North Sea oil and gas while driving down operational emissions, and said it's working on a range of lower carbon energy projects in the UK. BP stressed it expects to pay up to £1 billion in taxes for its 2022 North Sea profits, on top of around £250 million paid annually in other UK taxes. BP Chief Executive Bernard Looney said, "It's been our home for over 110 years, and we've been investing in North Sea oil and gas for more than 50 years. We're fully committed to the UK's energy transition, providing reliable homegrown energy and at the same time focusing on the drive to net zero." It was not all good news for BP, however, as it announced that on a statutory basis it swung to a $23 billion or £18.5 billion loss after taking a mammoth $25.5 billion, £20.4 billion hit from the move to ditch its near 20% stake in Russian oil producer Rosneft. BP co-owned Rosneft with the Kremlin but dropped its shares in response to the Ukraine war. The energy giant said it hopes this will not affect its shareholder rewards, as it announced another $2.5 billion or £2 billion in share buybacks. An article written by Ninian Wilson. The National News on Wednesday the 4th of May. McCall's untruth exposed as he accuses First Minister of lie. An article written by Hamish Morrison, political reporter. The former owner of the shipyard embroiled in the ferries debacle has been pulled up for telling an untruth while accusing Nicola Sturgeon of lying. Jim McCall, who was the owner of Ferguson Marine Engineering Limited, or FMEL, when the firm collapsed and was nationalised, said the First Minister had told a lie when she claimed 400 jobs had been saved by taking the Port Glasgow yard into state ownership. But he was also accused of telling an untruth when he was confronted with the fact he had falsely claimed he had not signed the contract for the ferries. Documents were later produced which showed he had. Challenged on the BBC's Good Morning Scotland about Miss Sturgeon's claim 400 jobs had been saved by the awarding of the ferries contract, Mr McCall said, "That's a lie, and at the time there were 150 employed, not 400. I think she was a bit rattled in the interview and she mixed it up with the statement that they make about saving the yard. It's not true." Faced with the assertion that the public would see the contract to have been as welcome for FMEL as it would have been for the Scottish Government when awarded, Mr McCall insisted the yard was doing well and would have survived had it not been awarded the CalMac contract. At the time, the yard had outstanding work and it was still working on the ferry Katrina, which wasn't launched until 2016, was delivered early and on budget, he said. It also had additional construction work and fabrication work, so there was no danger of the yard going under at that time. That was a slip by the First Minister in the interview, and it was about the constant repeated statements she makes about 400 employees at the yard. But Mr McCall also faced the embarrassing revelation he has got his facts mixed up by saying he had not signed the contract when he had. He said, "I did sign it. That was a mistake." Asked why he had claimed not to have signed, he said, "Because at the time I wasn't aware that I had until I checked up after I've said it. It was signed by the CEO of the yard and I did countersign it." The tycoon also said his firm had been upfront with the Scottish Government from the off that the firm would not be able to provide a full cash refund if the work was not completed or the yard went bust. This is central to the scandal surrounding the ferries contracts because senior civil servants warned the Scottish Government against awarding the contract to FMEL as the company would not commit to offering a builder's refund. Miss Sturgeon said that it was regrettable there was no evidence showing the reasons ministers had chosen to go ahead regardless. Mr McCall claimed it was commonplace for a company to be unable to provide a full cash refund guarantee. While Mr McCall insisted the firm was confident it was capable of completing the Glen Sannox and Hull 802 ferries, he denied using the contracts to squeeze more money out of the taxpayer. When the contract was initially awarded, it was valued at £97 million, and by the time FMEL fell into administration, the company had received £128.25 million from the Scottish Government. Mr McCall said, "There are very reputable reports in place to show that there were so many changes to the design after we got the contract. I think it's down as 346 owner observation requests. These are design changes from a specification that wasn't thoroughly thought out when it was placed." He admitted there was some small responsibility on the part of his company for the delays to the ferries, which are now to be completed more than 4 years late and more than 2 times over budget. But he appeared to blame the government for the bulk of the problems which have plagued construction since the contracts were first awarded in 2015. It comes after Scottish Labour was accused on Monday by the GMB union, which represents workers at the Inverclyde yard, of making careless attacks on the Scottish Government to score political points. An official representing Ferguson Marine workers warned Anna Sawa to dial down the rhetoric or risk imperiling the future of the yard. An article written by Hamish Morrison. The National Politics on Wednesday the 4th of May. Sturgeon accuses Sawa of being immature. An article written by Steph Braun, multimedia political journalist. Nicola Sturgeon has accused Scottish Labour leader Anna Sawa of political immaturity for continuing to stand against council coalitions. The First Minister said she couldn't understand her rival's position, adding that she was relaxed about deals between the two parties at a local level in an interview with the Daily Record. Mr Sawa was interviewed by the BBC yesterday and reiterated his opposition to coalitions in town halls despite East Renfrewshire, which is run by an SNP Labour partnership, being named the best performing council in Scotland by The Times. Ms Sturgeon said she suspected there was deep unhappiness with Mr Sawa's approach within Labour. She said, "It reveals, I think, a political immaturity, but also an oppositionalist mindset. Surely the whole point of being in politics is you want to make a difference to people's lives, and you can't do that in opposition. I just don't understand it, and I suspect there's a lot of deep unhappiness in his local parties across the country. My position is that we don't do deals with the Tories. Beyond that, it's for local groups elected for the SNP to judge what's right for local circumstances." On whether she would be relaxed about SNP groups hooking up with Labour ones, she said, "Yes, if they thought that was right and if policies underpinning that were right. Edinburgh is an example of how Labour and the SNP have managed to work together." Mr Sawa appeared to flounder on the issue of independence during the Good Morning Scotland interview. He said there was nothing wrong with having candidates who used to support independence but don't anymore, before denying involvement in the sacking of Glasgow Kelvin candidate Holly Cameron last year. Ms Cameron revealed she had voted yes in the 2014 referendum before she was deselected by Labour. An article written by Steph Braun. The National News on Wednesday the 4th of May. Scottish councils did not keep up-to-date records of children in foster care. An article written by Craig Meehan, multimedia journalist. The true scale of alleged child abuse in local authority foster care may never be revealed due to historic issues with record keeping, the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry heard. Opening submissions from 14 of Scotland's local authorities were heard on Tuesday, along with the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, or COPFS, Barnados and Police Scotland. Local authorities admitted that records relating to children in their care were not kept as up-to-date as they could be prior to the breakup of regional councils in 1996 and the establishment of the 32 separate local authorities. They also acknowledged that some survivors may not wish to come forward to share their experiences due to the trauma they'd faced. City of Edinburgh Council told the inquiry it was difficult to give an exact figure of the number of children looked after by them due to the way information had previously been recorded. Councils in attendance apologised to survivors that had suffered abuse in their care and pledged to use the experience to learn from mistakes made in the past. The COPFS told Lady Smith, chair of the inquiry, that there were very few recorded cases of abuse of children in foster care because there's no specific code within the case management system used to record crimes that relates to children who reported abuse. The Crown has now taken relevant steps to ensure that this does not happen in the future and has introduced a code specifically for reports from survivors of abuse within foster care settings. The inquiry also heard expert testimony from Professor Kenneth Norrie from the University of Strathclyde, who is an expert in family law. He gave an overview of the law in regards to foster care placement since the early 1930s until the present day. He argued that although there have been regulations in place with regards to children who were boarded out since the days of the Victoria Poor Laws, these were not always followed by regulators. Professor Norrie said you would think Scotland was at the forefront of doing really well, but if you asked, are those regulations being followed, you'd find that very difficult to answer. Professor Norrie's work has also found that there were significant gaps in updating relevant legislation relating to children in foster care throughout the latter half of the 20th century. Banning the use of corporal punishment for children in foster care came into place in the Fostering of Children's Regulations of 1996. Lady Smith thanked Professor Norrie for his valuable work in setting the law in context for the inquiry. Later this week, the inquiry will hear further expert testimony and scene setting as part of Phase 1. Witness testimonies from survivors of abuse will begin in Phase 2 later this month. It's expected that the foster care case study in the inquiry will last until the autumn. An article written by Craig Meehan. The National Politics on Wednesday the 4th of May. Sinn Féin set to become biggest party in Northern Ireland. An article written by Abby Garton-Crosby, multimedia political reporter. Sinn Féin is predicted to become the biggest party in Northern Ireland for the first time as leaders clashed over power sharing during a televised debate. A final poll ahead of the Stormont Assembly elections on May the 5th forecast the Irish Nationalist Party winning comfortably at the expense of the Democratic Unionist Party, or DUP, who were the only major political party to back Brexit. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, DUP leader, has been campaigning against the Northern Ireland Protocol and has repeatedly called on the UK government to trigger Article 16, the mechanism to prevent a hard land border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Sinn Féin has said the protocol is the answer, not the problem, and warned any unilateral action from the UK would not be acceptable. If Sinn Féin does return the largest vote share, they'll be entitled to nominate a First Minister. In the 2017 Stormont election, Sinn Féin closed the gap on the DUP with a 27.9%, 27 seats of the vote, compared to the Unionist Party's 28.1%, or 28 seats. The Irish News predicts that in 2022, Sinn Féin will overtake the DUP for the first time and take 26.6% of the vote share, with the Unionist Party dropping to only 18.2%. However, the Alliance Party of Northern Ireland is also predicted to increase its vote share from 9.1% in 2017 to sitting neck and neck with the DUP on 18.2%. Sinn Féin and the DUP are required to cooperate as a cross-party government in line with the Good Friday Agreement signed in 1998. However, during a debate on Tuesday evening, Mr Donaldson refused to confirm if he would accept the role as number 2 in the power-sharing agreement should Sinn Féin return the highest vote share following Thursday's poll. Mr Donaldson was challenged to say whether the DUP will form an executive or refuse to accept their salaries if re-elected. He reiterated his position that he will turn up on day one after the election, but will not form an executive until concerns around the Northern Ireland Protocol are dealt with. Mr Donaldson said the political institutions must be sustainable. Sinn Féin Vice President Michelle O'Neill said it would be absolutely unfathomable to tell the electorate that a new executive would not be formed following the election. She also said she still has not heard if Unionist leaders will accept the democratic outcome of the election, in a seeming reference to the poll predicting victory for her party. Mr Donaldson has not said if he will nominate a Deputy First Minister to serve along with a Sinn Féin First Minister in the joint office. Ms O'Neill accused the DUP of holding us all to ransom over its position on refusing to go back into an executive without action on the Northern Ireland Protocol. The resignation of First Minister Paul Givan in February left the executive unable to fully function. Ms O'Neill said, "While the rest of us want to put money in people's pockets and deal with the cost of living crisis, the DUP is telling people their identity is under threat." Mr Donaldson responded, pointing to the resignation of former Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness, which saw the Assembly collapse for 3 years. He said ministers continue in their posts, while Ms O'Neill countered, saying they're caretaker ministers. The leaders of the 5 largest parties took part in a live debate on BBC One Northern Ireland on Tuesday evening, ahead of polling day on Thursday. An article written by Abby Garton-Crosby. The National News on Wednesday the 4th of May. Threat of lawsuit over visa failures. An article written by Jane MacLeod. Home Secretary Priti Patel could face legal action over delays to visas which have left hundreds of Ukrainian refugees waiting weeks to come to the UK. A class action lawsuit is being prepared over inordinate and unreasonable delays in processing hundreds of visa applications made in March. Figures compiled by would-be hosts show there were at least 800 Ukrainian refugees still waiting last week for visas after applying within the first 2 weeks of the scheme. Examples of cases include a Ukrainian mother and her daughter, aged under 10, who applied for their visas around 5 weeks ago. The mother received her visa on April the 18th, but the girl is still waiting. The groups behind the action, Vigil for Visas and Taking Action over the Homes for Ukraine visa delays, say the delays have put people in Ukraine and border countries at risk and heaped considerable pressure and strain on UK hosts. Lawyers for the groups plan to send a pre-action protocol letter to the Home Office this week, asking it to sort out the endless muddles and tangles. They could then apply for a judicial review of the UK government's visa processing policy. Stuart MacDonald, SNP Home Affairs spokesperson, said Ms Patel had to answer for the massive delays compounding the trauma faced by those seeking refuge from war and terror. Unnecessary Home Office red tape is doing nothing but leaving refugees in the dark over their applications. It's no coincidence the EU nations who've waived visa requirements have taken in many more refugees than we currently have, he said. As it stands, the Home Secretary is completely failing to deliver on the UK's humanitarian obligations. It would be unforgivable if this situation leads to refugees giving up and putting themselves in harm's way by going back to Ukraine. There's still time for the government to do the right thing and bring in visa-free access. It must be done as a matter of priority. The legal letter will put the spotlight on 10 cases of Ukrainians who are still waiting for their visas after applying during the days after the Homes for Ukraine scheme first opened on March the 18th. The action is being prepared by Amanda Jones, an immigration and public law barrister. Ms Jones said hundreds of applications made on or before March the 31st remain outstanding. Phone calls to the Home Office are a waste of time. MPs chasing the Home Office get contradictory and unhelpful replies. The Ukrainian applicants, the vast majority of whom are women and children, are running out of money, hope and support in Ukraine, Poland, Slovakia and more. Many have no proper accommodation and are reliant on food donations. A UK government spokesperson said, in response to Mr Putin's barbaric invasion, we launched one of the fastest and biggest visa schemes in UK history. Over 86,000 visas have been issued so Ukrainians can live and work in the UK. This comes as Russian forces began storming a sprawling steel plant in the besieged port city of Mariupol yesterday, Ukrainian officers said, as a convoy carrying dozens of civilians evacuated from the facility over the weekend arrived in the relative safety of a Ukrainian-controlled city. Osnat Lubrani, the UN humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, said in a statement that thanks to the evacuation effort, 101 women, men, children and older persons could finally leave the bunkers below the Azovstal steelworks after 2 months. Ukrainian officer Denis Schleger, who is currently in Azovstal, confirmed the assault on Ukrainian television. He said, "The enemy is trying to storm the Azovstal plant with significant forces using armoured vehicles. Our fighters are repelling all attacks." Mariupol has come to symbolise the human misery inflicted by the war, as the Russian siege left civilians trapped with little access to food, water and electricity. Prime Minister Boris Johnson confirmed yesterday that the UK will send a package of support worth £300 million to Ukraine in the coming weeks, as he addressed the country's parliament remotely. Mr Johnson had earlier told ITV's Good Morning Britain that the government could have been faster in helping Ukrainian refugees. When pressed about the difficulties refugees had faced, Mr Johnson said, "So far 86,000 visas have been issued and 27,000 are already here, and I want to say thank you. 27,000 is a lot and it's growing fast, and I want to pay tribute to all those who are helping to look after Ukrainians. Could we have done it faster? Yes, perhaps we could." An article written by Jane MacLeod. The National Politics on Wednesday the 4th of May. Tories draft in Davison as Ross failing. An exclusive article written by Craig Meechan, multimedia journalist. The Tories have been accused of running a failing council election strategy as the party increasingly makes Ruth Davidson the face of the campaign. SNP MP Pete Wishart criticised the Conservatives for drafting in an unelected Tory Baroness to give it some electoral credibility. Baroness Davidson of London Links has increasingly become a prominent figure in the Tories' council election campaign. It comes as a recent panel-based poll suggested Douglas Ross's party is set to be pushed into third place by Labour. Election expert Professor Sir John Curtis said the findings suggest the Tory leader may face a serious challenge from Labour. Perth and North Perthshire MP Pete Wishart said Mr Ross is now seen as a liability and a burden to the party. Mr Wishart told The National, "It tells you everything you need to know about this failing Tory campaign, that they need to draft in an unelected Tory Baroness to give it some electoral credibility." Douglas Ross is now seen as a liability and burden to the cause of Scots Toryism because of the embarrassing flip-flop of backing the Prime Minister after rightly saying he should go over Partygate. Unfortunately for the Scots Tories, they will be forever tied with their UK Prime Minister, whoever they put on their posters and leaflets. The MP also replied to a Tory election poster with Ms Davidson's picture on it, saying, "Vote Ruth Davidson's Scottish Conservatives, no one else's, certainly not he who can no longer be mentioned." Fantastic. The former leader has become a high-profile campaigner in recent days as the Thursday council vote approaches, with mention of Ms Davidson significantly increasing on the party's social media. The Scottish Tory Twitter account alone shared posts mentioning Ms Davidson 17 times in just the past 2 days. She's been urging pro-union voters to give the Tories their vote, saying Nicola Sturgeon is treating Scots as fools over the ferry scandal. She said the failing record of Nicola Sturgeon and her candidates is on the ballot paper this Thursday. They've left Glasgow filthier than ever before. They've left drug deaths to spiral in Dundee. They've got plans to make it unbelievably expensive to drive to work in our capital city. Don't reward the SNP for failure. Get out to the polls on Thursday and teach them a lesson. An exclusive article written by Craig Meechan.
Recorded from The National on the 4th of May 2022. From the Culture section. Gordon Brown to appear in the Edinburgh Festival Fringe Show by the National News Desk. Gordon Brown is set to star in a one-off show at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. The former Labour leader will delve into his iconic political career during an interview with comedian Matt Ford. Baroness Ruth Davidson and Culture Secretary Nadine Dorris will also appear in shows at this year's festival. Ford will quiz Brown on the political party show at the McEwen Hall. The former Prime Minister previously appeared at the Edinburgh Book Festival in 2019. Davidson and Dorris, as well as Rory Stewart, Labour leader Keir Starmer, predecessor Jeremy Corbyn and Deputy Leader Angela Rayner will all join broadcaster Ian Dale for a series of In Conversation With events at the Edinburgh International Conference Centre. This year's festival starts on August 5th and finishes on August 29th. The article was by the National News Desk. Recorded from the National on the 4th of May 2022, from the Culture section, How to Get Free Key Worker Tickets for Sky Live Festival 2022 by Sophie Parsons. Sky Live Festival is giving away free tickets to key workers for the opening night on Thursday, May 12th. 200 free tickets are available on a first-come, first-served basis to staff who worked for NHS Scotland, Health and Social Care, care workers and Scottish Ambulance Service, Police Scotland and Scottish Fire and Rescue. The concert will take place in Portree and feature Donnie Munro and friends with special guest Manran. Sky Live Festival was first established in 2015 and takes place on the peninsula Am Miel, otherwise known as the Lump, in Portree on the Isle of Skye. The event brings together an eclectic mix of contemporary, traditional and electronic, one of Scotland's most unique and special festival sites. Here's how to get free key worker tickets. How to get free tickets for Sky Live as a key worker. Tickets will be available to key workers on a first-come, first-served basis and can be booked by visiting Sky Live's website. Ticket holders will be required to show ID upon entry to the concert as proof of employment. If you are not a key worker, a limited number of tickets are also available for purchase to the general public. Monroe said, "I am delighted we are able to offer this special gesture for all NHS and emergency service workers who serve their communities with such dignity, dedication and professionalism throughout the COVID crisis. Concert goers will have the opportunity of making donations to the Ukraine Appeal at collection points on the festival site." A festival spokesperson added, "We are indebted to those who kept us and our loved ones safe throughout the pandemic. We hope this gesture goes some way to showing our thanks to them." That article was by Sophie Parsons.
The National, May 5. Scotland's census stats climb after deadline extended. Report by Gregor Young. Scotland's census return rate now stands at 80%, following the decision last week to extend the deadline for the survey. Constitution Secretary Angus Robertson extended the deadline by 4 weeks to the end of May, citing a low response rate. At the time of his announcement last Thursday, 77.2% of households had responded to the census. Following the extension, opposition MSPs criticised the fact Scotland's census had been delayed from 2021 to 2022. Robertson said, "By allowing outstanding online and paper returns to be submitted until the end of May, we can ensure that everyone across the country has the opportunity to complete their return and help to shape important services in their community. Thank you to everyone who has filled in their census already. It is vital that we secure as high a response rate as possible so that the census can be effective in delivering its many benefits for future public services. For anyone that hasn't completed their census, please fill it in now." Paul Lowe, Chief Executive for National Records of Scotland, said, "Thank you to the 8 out of 10 householders across Scotland who have already done their bit and filled in their census. Can I pay particular tribute to the people of Aberdeenshire, South Ayrshire, and Na Elaine Sia, where over 85% of households have completed and returned their census. If you've been holding off submitting for whatever reason, please don't miss this final opportunity to submit your response." He said help is available through the dedicated website censusgov.scot or on the free helpline on 0800 030 8308. Paper forms are available on request. Report by Gregor Young. The National, May 5. Scottish elections. Tories set for major losses. Britain elects finds. Report by Angus Cochrane. A new poll suggests voters are set to abandon the Scottish Tories in the local elections. Douglas Ross's party is on course for substantial losses, according to the major Britain Elects survey, with Scottish Labour set to make gains. The SNP, meanwhile, are also forecast to endure slight losses. However, they could still make gains in the survey's best-case scenario. The Greens are on track to pick up seats, with the Lib Dems tipped to make smaller gains. The Britain Elects poll provides best and worst-case predictions, as well as a central figure. Based on the central results, the Scottish Tories are set to lose 83 council seats. Even in the best-case scenario, they are forecast to lose 49. In the worst case, it's minus 106. Labour are on course to gain 87, according to the central figure. That stretches to plus 101 in the best case result, or plus 51 in worst case. The best case scenario is for the SNP is plus 3, while the worst case is minus 25. The central prediction is the loss of 12 seats. The Greens are on course to gain 5 seats under the central figure, which could stretch to plus 8 on a good election night. The worst-case scenario is no change on their current position. Finally, the most likely scenario for the Lib Dems, according to the study, is losing 12 seats. If things go badly, they could lose 9. If the vote goes well, they could gain 15. Britain Elect's co-founder Ben Walker wrote in the New Statesman, "In Scotland, the SNP looks set for a middling set of results. The central forecast expects them to lose 12 seats, but it is possible they may shed as many as 25, or even on a good night, make a net gain of 3. These figures should be treated with caution. I have provided both a central forecast and a range of reasonable probability. The ranges, best and worst, help illustrate the level of uncertainty in local elections such as these." Report by Angus Cochrane. The National, May 5. Nicola Sturgeon hits out at former ferry bosses' lie accusations. Report by Xander Richards. Nicola Sturgeon has addressed key points in the ongoing ferry saga after being confronted by Scottish Tory leader Douglas Ross at First Minister's questions. Opening FMQs, Ross brought up the words of Jim McCall, who was the owner of Ferguson Marine Engineering Limited, FMEL, when the firm collapsed and was nationalised. However, the Scottish Tory leader quoted McCall, a billionaire based in the tax haven of Monaco, as saying that the shipyard had not in fact been in danger of collapse. Ross said, "Jim McCall did not mince his words on the radio yesterday. He called the First Minister out for lying. He said, and I quote, 'There was no danger of the yard going under at that time, no matter what, because the yard had other strong contracts.'" However, Sturgeon rejected this claim, casting doubt on whether McCall would have invested in a shipyard without contracts. She said, "Jim McCall is many things, but he's not a disinterested, objective observer on these matters. His claim the yard would not have been in jeopardy, would not have potentially closed had that contract not been awarded, wasn't tested, of course. That can only be a matter of opinion. But I'll tell you this, if Jim McCall is seriously arguing that he would have continued to invest his money in a yard that had no major contracts, all I can say is that is not the Jim McCall I know, so people can make up their own mind." When the contract was initially awarded in 2015, it was valued at £97 million. The ferries had been due to enter service in 2018. The 2 ferries, vessels 801 and 802, are now projected to cost as much as £250 million and not enter service until 2023. Potential delays to the ferries were raised as early as February 2016, with McCall being told of ministers' concerns about his business's cash flow in March 2017. By the time FMEL was nationalised in 2019, the company had received £128.25 million from the Scottish Government. Ahead of the signing of the contracts in 2015, FMEL confirmed that it was unable to provide a full builder's refund guarantee, a BRG, raising further questions about its cash flow at the time. Such a guarantee would have protected public cash in the event the ferries were not delivered. However, concerns raised by Caledonian Maritime Assets, the Scottish Government-owned firm, were overridden by the government, which handed FMEL the contract anyway. Audit Scotland found that there was insufficient documentary evidence to explain why Scottish ministers accepted the risks and were content to approve the contract award. At FMQs, Ross suggested that this vital missing document had been shredded. Sturgeon also addressed McCall's claims that she had lied when she said that keeping the yard afloat had protected 400 jobs. The billionaire had said, "That is a lie, and at the time there were 150 employed, not 400. Speaking at FMQs, the First Minister said, "He seemed to claim that I said there were 400 people employed in the yard back in 2015. I didn't say that, as the transcript will show. I said that 400 people are currently employed there, earning a wage and supporting their families, who would not be in employment today had the contract had not been awarded. That is just a matter of fact." McCall had also previously claimed he had not signed the contract for the ferries. However, this was revealed to have been untrue when documents bearing his signature were uncovered. McCall told the BBC earlier this week, "I did sign it. That was a mistake." Asked why he had claimed not to have signed, he added, "Because at the time I was not aware that I had, until I checked up after I'd said it. It was signed by the CEO of the yard, and I did countersign it." Speaking at Holyrood, Scottish Tory leader Ross said that the ferry fiasco was an example of the secrecy and incompetence this government is famous for. He said, "All we hear from Nicola Sturgeon is this is regrettable. First Minister, do you understand how angry it makes the public when you use weasel words like regrettable, rather than giving them the apology they deserve?" Referencing the council elections due to be held on Thursday, Sturgeon said the public would have an opportunity to cast their verdict. Report by Xander Richards. The National, May 5. Home Office sorry, new Scot was sent to Ukraine despite imminent Russian invasion. Report by Xander Richards. The UK government has issued a formal apology after it sent a new Scot to Ukraine to apply for a visa, despite knowing of the looming Russian invasion. Natalia Fisher, who lives in Bodham in Aberdeenshire with her husband Peter, was told by the Home Office that she would have to go to Ukraine to apply for a spousal visa if she wanted to stay in Scotland. Listening to the UK government's advice, she went. 2 days later, on February 24, Russia invaded. The United States had previously warned that Vladimir Putin had ordered a full-scale invasion of the nation, and on February 11, the UK had told British nationals to flee the country. However, Fisher was still told she would have to go there to get a visa. She was caught in the invasion and had to flee, finally meeting her husband in Budapest, Hungary, 2 weeks after she had first landed. Peter's presence helped the couple cut through the red tape of the UK government's disastrous Ukraine refugee scheme and return to Scotland. Karen Adam, the SNP MSP for Banffshire and Buchan Coast, who assisted the Fishers, wrote a scathing letter on March 2 to Home Secretary Priti Patel, expressing deep concern over the news that the UK government's Home Office instructed my constituent to travel to Ukraine in order to apply for a visa just days before the Russian invasion of the country. Adam continued on in the letter to say that the UK's immigration policy was unfit for purpose and endangered lives. 7 weeks after Adam had contacted the Home Office, the UK's Minister for Safe and Legal Migration, Kevin Foster, responded. He wrote, "I note Ms. Fisher was advised she must return to Ukraine to submit an application. I am sorry officials advised her of this, taking into consideration the events which were unfolding at the time. This should not have been done, as there was no need for her to do so. The most important thing is that both Natalia and Peter are back at home safely in Bodom," said Adam. Natalia should never have been made to go back to Ukraine, particularly when the UK government knew of the pending Russian invasion, with the build-up of Russian troops on the border. This ordeal has highlighted just how far removed Conservative politicians are from our values in Scotland. We are a welcoming country, but we have an immigration policy that has been imposed on us from a UK government that does not match the character of our nation. Report by Xander Richards.
Recorded on the 5th of May 2022 from the Culture section. Cutting Edge app brings virtual exploration to Orkney's famous attractions by Jane Cassidy. A digital tour has been launched which allows people to explore virtually 35 sites across Orkney, including those that make up the heart of Neolithic Orkney UNESCO World Heritage Site. The guide from Historic Environment Scotland, HES, is designed to help place a spotlight on the island's rich heritage and the people, places and stories that have helped shape it. It features 90 different stories that tell the tales of locations, from the finding of the Orkney Venus Neolithic figurine, the infamous killing of St. Magnus. Thanks to the new progressive web app PWA technology, the guide can be downloaded and then used on devices without mobile signal or data, meaning those exploring the islands in person will be able to enjoy the audio and video tours even in the most remote locations. The sites included span 10 islands and include Neolithic houses, standing stones, and chambered burial cairns, as well as churches, military installations, and a 19th century mill. The tour includes drone footage of popular attractions such as the Neolithic settlement Skara Brae and Maeshowe chambered cairn. With the help of 3D digital models, the public will be able to journey inside some of the less accessible sites across the islands, such as the home of Papa Westray chambered cairn and Tiversal Took chambered cairn. The two main narrators of the guide are Arcadians Dave Gray and Helen Fullis, who have both extensive broadcasting experience at BBC Orkney. However, it also features a range of guest presenters, including guided tours narrated by site staff and interviews with leading historians and archaeologists, a stonemason and a bruch builder. The guide also includes several literary extracts, such as the description of the killing of St. Magnus, taken from George Mackay Brown, Sir Walter Scott, and Norse saga writers, among others. HES Interpretation Manager Andrew Burnett said, "We are delighted to be able to share this new Orkney audio guide app, which will enable the public to explore a host of famous sites across Orkney. With cutting-edge PWA technology, not only does the app combine audio narration with high-quality drone and 3D scan videos once loaded, it also enables users to enjoy the guide without being reliant on mobile service." Culture Minister Neil Gray said, "As an Arcadian, I couldn't be more thrilled that people will be able to enjoy such a comprehensive digital tour of the spectacular heritage sites on the islands. The digital tour is currently available as a purchase option when buying an online ticket to one of HES's staff properties in Orkney." That article was by Jane Cassidy. Recorded from the National on the 5th of May 2022 from the Culture section. Priti Patel must urgently sort out passport delays, says SNP MP. By Steph Braun. The UK Home Office must take urgent action over passport delays amid suggestions of 1 million people who could miss out on summer holidays because of processing hold-ups, an SNP MP has said. Stuart MacDonald has written to Home Secretary Priti Patel slating her department's slow response to delays at the passport office, with many people waiting beyond the advised 10-week period to receive their new documentation. The Centre for Economics and Business Research, CEBR, has suggested up to 1 million people could miss out on trips this summer because of passport processing delays, costing up to £1.1 billion in cancellations. Glasgow South MP MacDonald said, "People across these isles face unnecessary stress, anxiety and misery because of hold-ups at the passport office and the UK government's incompetent and slow reaction to the issues. The current delays and issues are completely unacceptable and must be resolved to avoid ruining the travel plans of so many who have waited so long and sacrificed so much over the last couple of years. The Home Office, as a matter of urgency, must do everything it can to ensure people's passports are processed in a timely manner. They are able to get appointments, have questions answered, and are informed about the rules around travelling on a near-expired passport." MacDonald's letter reveals, "I've been inundated with calls from constituents who have been waiting longer than the advised 10-week period to receive their passport, have struggled to get a passport office appointment, or been promised callbacks that have never materialised, which has added to the anxiety. The Home Office must understand the anxiety, stress and misery these delays are putting upon our constituents. It is imperative that your department does everything it can urgently to ensure people's passports are processed in a timely manner. They are able to get appointments, have questions answered, are informed about the rules around travelling on a near-expired passport. The Passport Office has advised travellers to submit their application for a new passport at least 10 weeks before their planned departure date. The number of valid UK passports fell by more than 2.5 million during the first 2 calendar years of the COVID-19 pandemic, as people delayed applications due to not being able to go abroad anyway. And the Passport Office has insisted the delays are the result of the unprecedented demand from people who put off applying. The Home Office has already reacted angrily to the calculations by SEBRA, branding it completely ridiculous. It said, "These are unverified and nonsensical figures, which are not grounded in reality, and to treat them as credible is completely ridiculous." More than 90% of applications made in the period from January to March this year were processed in 6 weeks. The vast majority of passport applications are being processed within the 10-week service standard we've had in place and clearly advertised since April 2021. Anyone who needs to renew their passport ahead of the summer is encouraged to do so now. Last week, a senior government source claimed Boris Johnson had threatened to privatise the arse out of the Passport Office if it failed to clear the backlog. Johnson then refused to rule out the possibility that he would privatise the agency. That article was by Steph Braun.
And that was this week's The National Podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes with the publisher's kind permission. Thanks for listening.